Matt Wilson has been making grey colouring look effortless in so many of his books. In Paper Girls, he particularly shines. And actually, quite a lot of the storytelling in that book rests on his shoulders. The premise being some girls on a paper round get mixed up in a sci-fi story that sends them travelling through time, and mixing it up with weird aliens and time hoppers and much more. But the fun of this book, in the early issues, is that everything ends up happening in a world that looks very familiar to us. So it's about balancing the idea of familiar with something that feels wrong. Often that comes down to the way Wilson chooses to colour a page or scene. So that's what we're going to dive into in this episode, how Wilson's colouring really impacts the storytelling and what he's doing with his choices of palette and saturation to create those effects and emphasis. You're watching Strip Panel Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. Let's begin then with the very first time that something really obviously weird happens to the world in Paper Girls, which is halfway through the first issue. The gang finds a weird machine thing and something happens, there's a flash, and then they get outside. And earlier in the issue, Wilson has established the palette for this early morning world we find ourselves in, and it's almost exclusively blue, right? There's very little else here apart from the shades of that colour, and even Chiang on art and Brian K. Vaughan writing it let us see the sky in this big splash page. We know what the world is supposed to look like, and it's purely from a palette point of view. They're not making a big deal about saying, look, the sky is blue, look everyone, everything's blue. So a little bit later, when the girls come out that basement after they found this weird machine-y thing, and something's happened to them, we get this page. And specifically the panel in the bottom right corner. This is the one that pops out at you when you look at this page. There's that oh my god balloon, but the first thing that's just incredibly obvious is that the sky is now this new pink colour we haven't seen before. It's colour that's kind of out of their world, but like literally out of their world. It doesn't exist here. You can see a lot of the stars in the sky too, but you do need that explained to you that that's not normal. In fact, on the next page, a character says it. I've never seen this many stars in my life. So we need some expository signposting for that. And then another character even tells us the constellations have never looked like that. But what don't we need to be told about? What already is obvious to us? It's the new vibrant colour of the sky. It hits immediately, and from that single colour change we know that something is different before any characters even have to tell us so. And that's really powerful, because it avoids the need for too much exposition. You know, if Wilson can bring that element to the storytelling himself purely visually, then we don't need to spend time to have characters tell us that something's wrong. And the way he does it is by pure restraint as well. He's got a palette he's working to in this book, and flipping through a handful of the early pages, you can see it very clearly. And in fact, there are actually 18 consecutive pages where blue is the main colour throughout them. Then they go into the basement, and upon exiting it again, the blue drops in the sky to be replaced by this. By hammering home just how much of the world really is blue, it makes this pink pop even more. And by restricting his use of that pink anywhere else earlier in the book in any large amount, it means it comes as a bigger surprise to us as readers, and it hits harder. It's not just that pink that's popping back up again, it's, we've never seen this before. This shows a real level of patience for storytelling and world building as well from Wilson's point of view. It's one of the best and simplest tricks in comics and visual storytelling generally, that if you restrict access to certain things, certain visuals or colours, and then you unleash them when you need to, then you get a bigger pop from that. But it's not quite as easy as just throwing around colours whenever you need. You also need to make sure that in a way they're kind of jarring, in that they pop out, but not in a way that's distracting. Yes, that does sound quite tough. In issue 4, we get introduced to yet another colour, this lime green. We haven't seen much, if any, of this yet in any of the issues, and here Wilson renders this strange eye globe in that colour. Once again, it becomes something that doesn't actually fit in this world, in this story. The idea is it's like facing a colour that doesn't or shouldn't exist in the world. The pages previously are blue with this soft sort of pink, purple, reddish hue. And red-purple sits opposite yellow-green on the colour wheel, which is an extra level of clever from Wilson, because it means that these colours do fit together without becoming jarring, like say a deep green might have done. It still works with the other colours around it, but because Wilson has been colouring the pages with colours that all sit next to each other in the colour wheel, it feels a little bit out of place to reach across, like we haven't seen this before. And it all ties back into issue 6, and this is where the gang finds themselves back in an apparently normal world. So how do we know that? The sky goes back to normal, so we can now accept this as some level of normality. But then later in the story we get this page. And what stands out at you? We've got this character in a deep red, not a pastel colour like everything else around it. It almost looks lifted from like another comic. Turn the page and the character attacks this man who previously was in this pastel yellow raincoat, but now that raincoat becomes more saturated when he's getting killed. And this is the other thing that Wilson does really cleverly in this book. It's not just about playing with palette and appearance of new colours, but it's actually how saturated those colours are as well. Again, a very powerful tool if the rest of your book is particularly filled with pastel colours like Paper Girls is. Pastel colours are softer, less vibrant, less aggressive colours. Even that sky we saw back in the first issue was quite a soft pinkish purple colour. This red from its first appearance is matched only by one other thing in the book we've seen so far in any of the issues, and that's the blood from a character in an earlier issue. Wilson's giving us that link as a giveaway, a freebie. He's saying that this deep red, it links both this character and death. Sure, that panel in the corner is menacing, but it's made doubly so because of the appearance of the very heavily saturated red. A blue or green, even if it was saturated, wouldn't give the same response. And bringing the saturation of the raincoat up is also very interesting, because it links in with what the red suit is doing here. It's not shooting him, it's just seemingly like ripping his very being apart. It's altering something in this world, and that comes across in the colour work too, by lifting that saturation. And this is all clever work being done right under your nose by Wilson. He's good enough not to make any of this distracting, holding that suspension of disbelief well, not forcing your eyes to be jarred by any of it in a way that brings you out of the story. But he makes it all feel like it both exists in that story and also really shouldn't exist in that story. It's not an easy thing to do by any means, but you can tell it's crafted from the ground up to work like this, and that he's very conscious of the control he can elicit and his importance of the narrative effect on the story. As I've talked about before, colours aren't just colouring in. It's world building, it's narrative driving devices that a book sorely misses without it. And here's another fine example of a master of his craft. Thanks for watching. If you're a fan of Strip Panel Naked, please check out the Patreon, where your pledges help keep the channel running. And in return, you get access to tons and tons of extra content and analysis and interviews. For more comics talk and analysis, you can find me on Twitter @HassanOE, and finally hit subscribe to keep up to date with all the latest episodes, and we'll see you next time.